Dave, I'm a lecturer at Birmingham University where I do social media, and I'm really just that Paul asked me to chair this panel on kind of post-election landscape for publishers and startups. And somebody just made a comment in the room, it's only been a week. How can we do a kind of assessment this early on? But I'm delighted to have a very good panel. We're going to interrogate the subject. I think you've done really well and not written a single question down on the piece of paper that's all up with it. So hopefully we're going to get lots of questions from the audience. And we're going to be led by you, to be honest. We'll do an opening bit maybe. We'll be very much led by your questions and we'll see how it gets. So you'll do you can judge how long we're going to be up here. We have with us Matt Boardman. He's a political blogger, just the Boardman Wire. Next to him is our keynote later, Stuart Kirkpatrick, who's the founder of the Caledonian Mercury. Mark Pack is the co-editor of the Democrat Voice. And Sean Simon is the former Labour MP, former Creative Industries Minister. I think what would be good is we just do a little opening gambit from you guys and see what you think of our new era of big society, big government. Well, I can't work out which way around it. But maybe, Sean, you give us some thoughts on perhaps what the Labour legacy is here. And clearly there's a legacy in the economy bill that you're almost closely associated with. And we're not quite sure which way the coalition will go on. I think Labour repeal, not repeal.
Hello. Yeah. Seeing as they were both in favour of it and both vote for it, I think it's rather unlikely that they'll repeal it somehow. I also don't think it's particularly relevant to the question. There are bits of it. Well, it's relevant in the sense that there are bits of it that would have made part of the journalistic landscape easier, which the coalition will scrap, which will make it harder. I think my summary of the broad message would be it will be in the immediate future will be not a million miles away from what it was before, but it will be worse. There'll be less money, there'll be less government money. Somebody said to me just a few minutes ago, remains to be seen how interested the government's going to be in promoting digital engagement, social engagement online, hyperlocal and so on. And if you thought the previous government didn't seem that interested, believe me, the next one is not going to be the slightest bit interested. When they're cancelling billions of pounds worth of schools and hospitals all over the place, as they are already doing. The notion that they're going to be investing in anything that people in this room invest their time and commitment in, I think is fanciful. And there were some people in the last government, not very many, there were some people in the last government who were interested in this field and who were trying to drive things forward, and who did make some progress. I think one thing that might happen is a bit tangential, but I think it'll be interesting to this audience, is there was a lot of work done under the last government on open data, which was a very, very long process, started by Tom Watson 3 years ago, and tenaciously driven forward by Tom Watson over those years and by one or two other people later. The civil service machine eventually got it, and there were really radical plans in place to open data during the second half of this year. I can't imagine why the coalition would, other than proceed with those plans, which, if that's what comes to pass, it will be a classic example of a new government getting the credit for the spade work that a previous government has done, but at least it will be a good thing and will take the web community a step further. So that's what I think.
Mark, Good Democrats, take the credit for Labour's initiatives?
I wouldn't quite put it like that, perhaps not surprisingly, but I think on that last point, I think that is a very important issue and potentially really good news for local publishers and hyperlocal bloggers and so on, which is that if you look at the commitments that are in the coalition agreement in terms of opening up government data, extending the reach of freedom of information, and not just opening up data but making data available in usable formats, there is potentially a bonanza of raw material available there, which not only, and it will be far greater in volume than traditional media outlets can cope with in terms of looking through and finding stories and so on, but also will remove one of the advantages the traditional media often have when covering stories about having the contacts and the connections and the access to detailed and technical research services which allow them to dig up stories and data that isn't available more widely. So I think one of the impacts of those policies, and also publishing sort of online and openly far more government spending contracts and so on, will be there's a huge amount of information out there available then that pretty much anyone can sit down at a computer and look at and start trying to make sense of. So the ability, not just the ability, but also in a sense the necessity, if that's actually really going to mean anything, the necessity for lots of people outside the traditional media to start making use of that data will be there. And I can quite easily imagine we look back in 4 or 5 years' time and see that what will hopefully happen over the next 6 months has given a huge boost to that sort of hyper-local and outside the realms of the traditional media coverage of politics and government and finance and holding public authorities to account and so on, which will be great. It'll be painful for the public authorities to get held to account, which is why it's important that that opening up is done soon before people get too used to being in power. But once it's done, it's very, very hard to roll back, as you see with things like freedom of information and so on. Once it's done, it's really hard to undo.
Stuart, is that something you'd look forward to, that's going to be this extension of Freedom of Information Act, a wider range of Quangos and departmental public bodies? I seem to recall here, and a Blackaby at the Post, that's an impression of Business Inc. and being told that you couldn't get that information because they were...
Because it holds a contract with AWM, who is AWM. Sorry. Basically fund, I think, I'm right in saying this, fund the whole of Business Link.
Yeah.
But because it's one step removed from AWM, it's not FOIable.
So we might get those kind of organisations under your radar. Is that going to be a boost to organisations like yours?
Any extension of FOI is going to be a boost. I'm going to take a slightly different take on this because Scotland is different.